Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this lunchtime webinar. We're so grateful today to have two attorneys, not just one, from the city, Aarin Miles and Jannice Ashley, here to speak about the city's newly enacted non-discrimination ordinance. That will be Aarin, and then affordable housing issues, including deed restrictions to ensure affordable housing, which will be Jannice Ashley. Just want to let everyone know, feel free to put your questions in the chat if you like. We will be holding questions until the end of each respective presentation. So at the end of Aaron's presentation, she'll take questions. And then at the end of Jannice's, she will take questions, but I can relay any of those you may have via the chat. And with all that said, Aarin, go ahead and take it away.
Great, thank you, Matt. I'm just going to get my presentation up in 1 second. All right, can you guys see the presentation? Awesome, thank you. All right, hello everyone. My name is Aarin Miles. I am an assistant city attorney with the city of Asheville. I'm going to be providing some an overview of our non-discrimination ordinance. Any questions that you have, I will address at the end of the presentation, and I'll go ahead and get started. We're going to cover what it applies to, the protected classes, and the enforcement measures. So our non-discrimination ordinance was a joint effort with the county. So we worked very closely with the county to get us very substantially similar ordinances. So the county has an ordinance and the city has an ordinance. I'm only going to be addressing the city ordinance today. The ordinance applies to public accommodation and employment. It does have a section that mentions housing. However, the section refers any housing discrimination to the North Carolina Human Relations Commission. And I'll provide more context about that later in the presentation. So, like I stated, it prohibits discrimination in public accommodation and employment, and these are the sections and the protected classes. These are pretty standard protected classes across any non-discrimination ordinance, and they match the ones that are with the county. When it comes to housing, like I stated, we do refer all of our housing discrimination to the Human Relations Commission. I will state though, within the ordinance, it does provide two interpretations. One for sex discrimination in housing, which includes discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. It also provides an interpretation for race discrimination, including the basis of natural hair and hairstyles, and housing discrimination based on race. In regards to enforcement measures, the Office of Equity and Inclusion will handle all of the enforcement when it comes to the non-discrimination ordinance with assistance from the City Attorney's Office. All complaints can be filed online. I will provide a link for the city's website at the back of the presentation, where all the forms, the ordinance is also can be found there. And I believe Matt will send out a link to the ordinance as well. So once the complaints are received, then this office will send a notice of filed complaint to the respondent, so the organization, person, or entity in which the complaint has been filed against, and then they have an opportunity to answer that complaint. Once the complaint is received, the Office of Equity and Inclusion will then start an investigation and request documentation in order to come up with, to make a determination whether or not there's reasonable cause that there is in fact a violation has occurred, is occurring, and is going to occur against the non-discrimination ordinance that is in place. The goal of the non-discrimination ordinance is to have a voluntary resolution. The hope is not to have to issue many violations or citations. So at any time during the process, if there's an open complaint, there can be some sort of voluntary resolution between the parties that the city's Office of Equity and Inclusion will assist with. Some housing resources. So for those, since our ordinance does not specifically address housing outside of what I've already stated, the North Carolina does have a Fair Housing Act, which is substantially similar to the federal Fair Housing Act, which HUD enforces. And our Office of Equity and Inclusion, with sending it to the North Carolina Human Relations Commission, would assist in making sure that they're aware of these other resources that are available both on the state and federal level. And these are just some helpful resources. The link to the Human Relations Commission's website where complaints can be filed, as well as the city website, which provides the ordinance and any forms. We've created forms for complaint, for answers, amendments, in order to try to make the process as streamlined and easy for citizens to make any type of complaints under the ordinance, as well as any contact information for the Office of Equity and Inclusion is also included on the website as well. Any questions?
I have one, Aaron.
Yes.
So you said that if somebody has a fair housing complaint, they would run it through the North Carolina Human Relations Commission. So would their complaint be, I guess, is there an option on the form to include something about specifically Asheville City's non-discrimination ordinance in addition to North Carolina fair housing laws? Like, how does that work?
So they have on the form, it's on the complaint form itself, there are three options. You can either click public accommodation, employment, or housing. And on the form, it also indicates that we will assist in helping to file a complaint with the North Carolina Housing Commission. So they could fill out our complaint form, and we can help assist streamline that process with the Human Relations Commission of North Carolina. So they can fill out the form, and our ordinance is also cited on the form with the appropriate sections for our city ordinance.
Okay, thank you.
If there's no more questions, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Jannice. And if there's not questions now, I can always answer questions towards the end as they arise.
Okay, do we have the camera on and everything's, is everything all set, or do I need to share?
No, you're good to go.
We're good to go.
Mm-hmm.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jannice Ashley. I'm a senior assistant city attorney. I've been here for 10 years, and I mainly work in the areas of planning and zoning, real estate, community development, economic development. And I work very closely with the community development department on such issues as affordable housing. I understand from Matt that our community development director, Paul D'Angelo, and our economic development director, Nikki Reed, spoke to you recently. I don't know if it was this year. They probably went over what the city is trying to do to address affordable housing issues in terms of affordable housing loans from our community development department. But I want to talk to you today about another mechanism which they may not have talked about, which is how we have found conditional zonings to be effective in creating affordable housing and preserving affordable housing, both rental and for sale housing in Asheville. I'm sure as realtors you all know the rising costs of housing, both in the rental market and in the for sale housing. It bears repeating that the Bowen report, which Paul D'Angelo probably discussed, it's a housing study the city's commissioned and updated over the past 10 years. And the most recent findings are that more than 65% of renters are cost overburdened in this city, meaning that they pay between 30 or 50% of their income towards rent. And over 28% of homeowners are also cost overburdened, again, paying between 30 to 60% or 50% of their income towards their housing mortgage costs. So affordable housing is always a topic that we are struggling in the city to try to address. So with the conditional zonings, go ahead. I first want to talk about zoning and affordable housing and want to tell you, make clear that inclusionary zoning is not legal in North Carolina.
Janice,
Yeah.
I don't mean to interrupt, but we are still just seeing the question slide from Aaron's presentation.
Oh,
So
sorry.
I don't think you made the switch over. Just wanted to
Okay.
address that now.
Okay. Maybe put it in my first tab. Let's see. Okay, can you go back to the original just so they can?
There we go.
Sorry. All right. Now you can see, this is my introductory, okay, great. Okay, so I did my introduction. Now we can go to the first slide. So about inclusionary zoning. Inclusionary zoning is when a local government mandates that affordable housing be included as part of a project approval. That is not legal in North Carolina, although there are several towns in the state that try to do it and have not been sued. But we always need to make that clear. Why is it not legal? Local governments in North Carolina only have the powers that are granted to them by the North Carolina legislature. So what I have here is our zoning authority in North Carolina, and I know it's a lot, and I probably shouldn't have written so much, but basically, if you were to say, what can we use zoning for? You will not see affordable housing as a specified purpose that we can use zoning for. It's more that we could use things to restrict height of buildings, stories, density, all the kinds of things you would normally think of in a zoning ordinance. Next slide, please. However, there is a zoning mechanism called conditional zonings that do allow for affordable housing conditions. Basically, a conditional zoning is a process that allows for flexibility in the development of a property while ensuring the development is compatible with the neighboring uses. This means that usually a developer or an applicant wants to ask for conditional zoning. It has to come from the applicant or the property owner because they need modifications to what they would normally be able to do in a certain zone. And so, for example, they might say, we want to build higher density than we would normally be allowed. We want to build greater height limits. We want to have narrower sidewalks. And so they come to us with conditions saying, we want to do residential conditional zoning, and these are the conditions that we're going to ask you to approve. And the city needs to make sure that those conditions are consistent with our comprehensive plan and won't have an impact on the neighborhood. The key here is the third bullet, that these conditions must be mutually agreed upon by the local government and the property owner. And they are site-specific standards that are reasonably related to the impacts of the development. Once the conditions are agreed upon in a conditional zoning ordinance, that ordinance is recorded, and everything that developer is committed to runs with the land. They could not say, they said, we're going to build 6 buildings, and then decided to build 7. They would be in violation of their zoning ordinance. They'd have to come back to the city for the process to request an amendment to their conditional zoning. Let's see. So, there is a process to the approvals. It's basically a process where there are public hearings, and it needs to go usually to our planning, and it always has to go to our planning and zoning commission, and then it will go up to city council for final approval. And I often like to think of a conditional zoning almost as a negotiation. There's sort of a give and take. You know, you're asking to do this. We will ask you to do this. Next slide, please. So many of the conditions, as I mentioned before, have to do with location of buildings, number of dwelling units, street access to streets or sidewalks. But more commonly, and I'd say for the past 10 years in almost every residential development we've had, there are conditions to provide affordable housing units. And again, since these conditions must be mutually agreed upon and they're often proposed by the developer, probably because they're going through an approval process and they want approval of their project, this is not the same as inclusionary zoning, which is a mandated requirement to include housing. It's a mutually agreed upon condition. Yes. So I went through our conditional zonings and saw that in the past year, we've had approximately 16 projects, and they're typically multifamily developments that requested conditional zonings and committed to provide affordable housing units in their development. This is a total of 302 affordable units. The majority of these developments committed to at least 10% of the total units to be affordable to households at 80% of AMI, which is our affordable housing standard, for periods of at least 10 years. I do have the 80% AMI limits for a four-person household, for example, is 60,100. And I'll refer later in the presentation to where you can find all these, we call them AMIs, that stands for Area Median Income, so that you can know what we're talking about when we say this is affordable. But the majority of these conditional zoning projects had no financial subsidy from the city, meaning what Paul and Nikki probably talked to you about is providing housing that had an affordable housing loan from our housing trust fund, or a CDBG loan, or perhaps tax credits from the state. These do not. These are private projects, but they are able to make it work in their pro forma. We do have another mechanism of financial incentives called land use incentive grant, or we refer to it as Luigi, even though it's really Luigi. Luigi kind of rolls off the tongue. But, and it acts as a tax rebate program for a period of time. In a nutshell, you would say when the development is, before it happens, the tax value is X on the land. Once it's developed, it will be a certain value. And so we hold down the cost, the differential on that, and give it, they pay the tax, but we can give them a rebate for a period of time. But that program requires that they have to commit a minimum of 20% of their units affordable at 80%, and for a period of 20 years. So of the projects I mentioned, there are, I think I said there were 3 of them that were granted land use incentive agreements, and I didn't count up the number of units, but certainly if each one of those developments had at least 20% affordable, that gets us to our goal faster. Next slide. I've provided for Matt a sample of conditional zoning ordinance. This one has been recorded. It's a final one. It's a public document. So you can get a sense of what an overall approved conditional zoning looks like. And I guess, Matt, you could share that now. But from that, I have taken, there's a condition number 6. They're kind of long documents because you're recording the site plan, you're recording all the conditions, you're recording the ordinance itself, which states what kind of zoning it's going to be. But in number 6, if you were to go through the conditions, you have this sample affordable housing condition. And we try to, that you see on your slide, we try to write them the same. But in this case, they committed to 10% of the units, which was 12 units, because it was a 120 unit development, and needed to meet our standards for AMI, 80% AMI, which again are published by the city every year for a period of 10 years. And it also required that they enter into an affordable housing deed restriction. We require this now of all of our conditional zonings that are committing to affordable housing, because they allow us to enforce it and monitor that condition. Affordable housing, I also shared with Matt, Paul and I have just developed updated templates for an affordable housing deed restriction for rental and also for sale. Just to summarize what you will see in affordable housing deed restriction for a rental, it will show the number of or percentage of units they've committed to, the affordability level, the duration of the affordability period, And we run that, we run the duration from their final CO. So, sometimes projects usually take 2 years to build. We don't want to start our affordability period as soon as they start building. We wait until they're almost done. But they have to notify their leasing agents so that they have met the condition by the time they're ready to get their final CO. Otherwise, you would be in a situation where they'd be probably fully leased up and say, oh yeah, now we have to make sure that some of our units are set aside. We also usually in the conditions, and I don't think I mentioned this, but we don't want them all concentrated in the same building or the same area. So we do require that these units are spread throughout the development. So you would not know this is an affordable unit, or you wouldn't know one apartment from the other. That's the goal. The most of the conditional zonings that I mentioned are for rental units, but we have seen some affordable housing, for sale housing, and of the numbers that I listed, there were 3 projects that committed to for sale units for a total of 12 affordable homes. And we will require an affordable housing deed restriction for those as well, where we would again be looking at the affordability level, the duration of that, and what the purchase price is. And basically, once the developer has created this unit and is ready to sell it for the first time, they would need to contact our community development director to double check what is the current income eligibility requirement and what would an eligible purchase price be, and then get approval from our community development director for that. Typically, we'll have people offer to make them affordable to 80% of AMI, and that's a good goal. But what we've found in experience is that 100% at AMI, people are more able to qualify for a home, that sometimes it's difficult when they're at 80% of AMI to be able to get a loan or a mortgage. So what you're seeing there is from Paul D'Angelo. He said that's the affordable housing price, again, geared to somebody at a 4-person household, from 80% AMI to 100% AMI. Next, please. And then I just wanted to talk about some specific examples of affordable housing success stories, for sale housing, because I don't think we hear about that as often. And just this year, we had two units that were at the Skyloft condominium, which is near downtown, which had been the recipient of a conditional zoning in 2007. And in 2007, that project developer said they were going to build 69-unit condominium development, and they committed to having 7 of those units, 10% affordable, for sale for a period of 10 years. 10 years goes very quickly. I wasn't here in 2007, but I am happy to say that we have now been able to extend that affordability period because of the homeowners that wanted to work with us, the realtors that wanted to work with us, and this is the story of those 2 affordable condos. Next slide, please. The first example is a 2-bedroom, 1-bath condominium, 776 square feet. It was built in 2007. On this one, the original purchaser went into foreclosure in 2015. We were notified because we had a notice of sale in the system because we had the deed restriction. At first, the foreclosure company said that they had a lot of people interested, investors, who wanted to snap this up. But our deed restriction at the time survived foreclosure. And so we said, well, nobody else was interested in buying it. So we were on the courthouse steps, we were the only bidder, and we were able to buy it for 145, well, I think 130 something thousand, and do some repairs. In 2017, we sold it to an income eligible home buyer for 145,000. The appraised value of them was 200,000. And she agreed as part of buying it at that affordable price to enter into a new deed restriction that would extend the period of affordability for 99 years. So the subsequent homeowners who buy this home will have to be income eligible and have to get it at an affordable purchase price. That was the first time we had done that. We weren't sure how it would work, but in this year, January 2021, that homeowner decided it's time for her to sell. She knew it was subject to the deed restrictions. Her realtor contacted us, said, how does this work? It is kind of complex. But with the information that they received from the Community Development Department, they were successfully able to find an income eligible homeowner and sell it for a purchase price of $170,000. As I said, I've heard from the realtors and I've noted them here and I've called them and told them I was going to have this presentation, but the seller's agent was Chrissy Miller of eXp Realty. The buyer's agent was Beth Butler of Visa Realty. I believe Beth is going to be on this call. So if somebody wants to know how this worked from a realtor perspective, might want to ask her some questions, but we couldn't have done it without these realtors because they're complex. Deed restrictions are complex and they had to help their clients decide whether this is the right thing for them to enter into, and also had to help lenders understand this process. I also just went on the tax records just to see what other units in this building are going for. And of course, this is just tax value, but I saw that there are two bedroom, 2 bath units in this same building that have a tax value of $247,000 to $279,000. Next. And then the second success story, also at Skyloft, was a little bit different. I mean, it's the same, about the same size unit, 2 bedroom, 1 bath, 854 square feet. At this one, the original purchaser decided to sell her unit. The 10-year affordability period was over. So she didn't technically have to sell it to somebody at an affordable unit. But she did have a soft second mortgage from the city, which was designed to help with affordability as well. And it was $126,000. So she would have had to pay that off if she were to sell it at market rate. I think because she wanted somebody else to have that same opportunity that she'd been given, she asked us, well, if I sell it to somebody at an affordable rate, what then? And so the city agreed to forgive that soft second mortgage in exchange for her entering into a new deed restriction with the new buyer, an income eligible buyer, and selling it for an affordable price for a 99-year period. And the realtors involved in that were Lynn Bolzer, the Nest Realty was the seller's agent, and Browning Hemrick with Keller Williams was the buyer's agent. And I think there were no issues with selling it for $190,000, getting the person income eligible household qualified by Paul D'Angelo, Community Development. And so again, another success story that closed in June of this year. And on this one, I checked the building on the tax records, and the other units in the same building are going for 1 bedrooms, are going for $258,000. Again, it was sold at $190,000. 2 bedrooms, $380,000, and the 3-bedroom unit on a tax value, $511,000. So this is certainly a way that has proven to be successful in providing affordable units, and we hope to do more of it. When we do for sale housing, it is a little bit more complex, and so I'm glad to have the opportunity to talk to the realtors about this, because you may hear more about this. But now I'm happy to answer any questions you have about conditional zonings, deed restrictions, anything you want to ask me. Oh, and helpful resources, this is a link to the Community Development Department. They have an excellent website. They have a special link for affordable housing, which will talk about some of these conditional zoning units. They also put out a brochure that I think is sponsored by the Land to Sky Realtors that has a list of affordable housing options in the city and developments that have affordable housing. Not just, some are conditional zoning, some are pure public housing developments or different things like that. That's Paul's name, that's my name, and you can feel free to contact me after this with any questions, but for now, I'd like to open it up for questions any of you have.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jannice. And thank you for mentioning that pamphlet. You know, I try to mention it in all my classes and I've tried to get the word out, but very useful resource. So feel free to come by and grab some of those if you like, everyone out there. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to allow people to unmute if they want that option to ask questions. But you can also put it in the chat and I can relay that as well. So let me change the settings here really quickly. Okay.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Mhm.
Thanks. I have a question. I love this idea. I'm an agent and I love this idea of the deed restriction and those examples you just shared. I'm curious if you can speak to, as brokers, if we are looking at data, and for example, in some of these, condo buildings, is it easy to see if a transaction had situation like this? If I'm looking at comps, for example, I can imagine there needs to be a story that could accommodate such a difference in purchase price when helping either a seller or a buyer in a unit like that, for example.
Well, because I just did some research on the tax records site, it was interesting to me. They do seem to have a tab that says restricted. And I have to wonder, and maybe this is a question for Beth or somebody that was involved in this. We always ask for an appraised value because we certainly don't want somebody to be paying more, even at an affordable price, than the appraised value. But I'm not sure if appraisers factor into the fact that it has a deed restriction and consequently it is not valued as high as it would normally be. And that would account for some of the difference. I also kind of interestingly noticed that on this development, it seems like mainly only the affordable units had just one bathroom. And again, where most others had two bathrooms. So that goes to my prior note that when we do a deed restriction, even for sale housing, we usually try to say it needs to be comparable to the market rate units that you are building. And so we'll try harder in the future to make sure that's the case.
Right.
Anyone else? And you'll see that I finally figured out how to put documents via Google Drive. So I belatedly put in the NDO complaint form and the NDO answer response from Aaron's presentation as well.
And Matt, I forgot to include my contact information in my presentation. I'll update it and then send it over to you so you can disseminate it.
Wonderful. Yeah, we will, by the way, again, we will post this, including all the attachments on the LOTSAR site later this week.
I don't want to call Beth out, but if she is there, I did mention to her that I would say, if she's real advocate for this. When I talked to her the other day, and she said that was so important this happened. So Beth, if you have anything to add about the process, it might be helpful.
You should be able to unmute, Beth. Okay, there we go.
Yes, thank you so much, Matt and Jannice. I am an advocate, as well as anyone who has chosen to spend an hour of their day here. And I thought that was a great question that you asked earlier. I think it was Nadine. Did I get the right? Forgive me if I didn't. But about the value relative to, okay, sorry. About the value of the property relative to other condos that had sold for what the going price per square foot. And I will say that the appraisal came in and worked out great. The appraiser did know of the deed restriction because I was very proactive. We had, just an FYI, we had a national mortgage company say yes, they would finance this. And then we got deeply into it and they popped out and said, no, we don't like the deed restriction. So I immediately got on the phone with a mortgage lender who I knew we could trust and who would be an advocate and had a deep storefront, if you will, of solutions that could accommodate this particular kind of situation. And I had worked with him before on some things that were a little bit sticky. And so he and I stayed in lockstep, as well as the attorney. I proactively called Will Reed, who handled the transaction, and said to Will, this is the case, this is the situation, this is what's coming up. Let's all be informed. And so title was aware, the attorney was aware on the front end, the mortgage lender was aware, and frankly, I just stayed in lockstep communication with everyone, and it took it, but that's okay. So perhaps I rambled a little bit, but it was something that didn't make itself happen. I felt like I had to be available and very connected in order to keep it moving forward. I will applaud Paul D'Angelo and Jannice, because whenever we had a question or a response, I found them to be very proactive. I don't know if I'm as responsive as they were. I was thrilled with the city and how they were as responsive to our questions.
Thank you. Any other questions before we wrap up? Okay. Well, in that case, thank you so much, Aarin and Jannice. This was very informative. Again, everyone, thank you for being here. We will post this later this week, including the documents, and we hope that you will join us on the 26th for Nathan Pennington's lunchtime webinar. That's going to be another good one. So appreciate you all. Again, Aarin and Jannice, thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.